go.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Ask Anything, brought to you by Moser Consulting. I'm your host, Angel Leon, Moser's Director of Personnel. We're glad that you're with us for this episode of Ask Anything because today we're going to be discussing cybersecurity trends with one of our own, our Director of Security and Compliance, Eric McCombs. We're going to be chatting a little bit about DeepSeek AI and how a lot of that information about several months ago you probably heard and you were like, huh, who is this? Well, DeepSeek AI is a Chinese startup that has recently gained attention for its advanced AI models, particularly DeepSeek-V3 and DeepSeek-R1. These models are praised for their efficiency and cost effectiveness, rivaling even the most advanced model from companies like OpenAI and Meta. DeepSeek's AI assistant has become the top-rated free application on Apple's App Store in the US. However, there have been concerns about the potential risk associated with installing DeepSeek AI on a company's network, including the possibility of accessing and exposing confidential information. Before we get into this topic, let's welcome our guest, Eric McCombs. Eric, welcome to Ask Anything. How are you?
I'm doing well. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, no, it's our pleasure. Honestly, we've had a lot of conversations about AI in this space. And when DeepSeek came out several months ago, I was very interested because of some of the things I mentioned about it being cost effective and it being free. And I mean, you can get a free version of OpenAI's and Meta's, but DeepSeek AI seemed to be that, oh my God, it's almost perfect. It's like, this is exactly what we should be getting. But that's not really the case. So I'm going to start by asking you, what makes DeepSeek AI stand out from other AI models currently available?
I guess I'll start by saying, yeah, when it first came out, I think I replied within maybe 24 hours when it first came out and sent our company notice that we should not install it on our systems and not use it right away. To be the voice of caution as a security person, it's my job. But it is interesting in that, DeepSeek itself, it does hold that efficiency that you've talked about. It does do stuff with less resources than other models that Meta, that OpenAI program and ChatGPT. They're using older chips. They're not using the latest NVIDIA chips because the United States has put an embargo on those assets going to China. As you mentioned, DeepSeek being a Chinese company, they're limited in what they can do technology-wise. Whether that inspired them to streamline their design. But again, it was something that, again, by all appearances, meets the same standards as ChatGPT, as Google's AI project, and it does it with fewer resources. It's more efficient, which, again, it upset the stock markets there for a brief period of time with what was happening to NVIDIA and their chips. And so with that promise of a disruption, I think it's been interesting to watch how it's developed from the standpoint and how the reaction has been. Now, strictly from a security standpoint, what DeepSeek does at its foundation as a large language model is similar. It produces similar responses. It works in the same way as your other AI products. The difference really comes down to, from a security standpoint, of where the ultimate data resides. Why I sent out, for our company, subsequently you've seen the US government, you've seen some states have been specific in banning the technology. Australia recently also banned it on government servers, is where the ownership of the data and where the transmission of the data lies when you install that application. In DeepSeek's case, it is, being a Chinese privately owned company, the data is held on when you're using the public option, the app that you install on your phone, or if you connect to out, its data is stored in China. Data is transmitted across the China mobile telecom network there in those final legs. So all of the data is there. DeepSeek does acknowledge that they do key logging. They monitor the keystrokes. They store the data, have your data. And that's really, as a security person, data in the US traveling overseas in particular is a concern. That's why the federal government, state governments, corporations as well have a concern, just to make sure that data is protected. The same security controls actually apply across the board, and the same concerns should apply even to internal or US held companies where the data is stored.
Right.
We still need to be aware of how we're handling the data, but from not from a national security, but from a corporate security or personal privacy concerns in that regard. But yeah, DeepSeek it was very interesting when it first came on to see that and to make sure that we respond with a wary eye as security people as we're supposed to do.
Yeah, and we've talked in this podcast before about what you're putting into, especially the open sources, if you will, AI models. I mean, even ChatGPT, the free version that you get, the data that you're putting, your inputs, your prompts, if you will, you have to be careful, especially if you're using it for business purposes, for your business, for the company that you work for. Recently, we had an episode where we talked about the guardrails that we should have as organizations in those prompts and what type of information we're sharing with those systems, because even the US based ones, as you mentioned, those could still be compromised. And, we're talking about DeepSeek AI, obviously being a Chinese private organization, but we don't know, because we don't know how far that organization goes and who it has tied to, whether it has ties to the Chinese government or not. That stuff obviously remains to be seen. But it is one of those things that even thinking about local, and by local, I mean US-based organizations using US-based AI models, you have to be careful with the data, the prompts that you open up, the information that you're sharing with it, because you don't know. I mean, as I mentioned, we had an episode where Melinda Lauder was here, and we were talking about how she did a little exercise with some of our competitors, and she was trying to find their marketing strategy. And she said, I put information about our competitors, and I wanted it to tell me if it could find any marketing strategy that they were working on. And it put up information about marketing strategy for some organizations here locally. And so that's part of the security aspect, right? If you're going to be using AI, if you're going to be using all these models, there's a lot of good that can come of it, but there's also a lot of bad things that you can be doing, because you're basically revealing company secrets, or in this case, a marketing strategy, which a lot of people would think it's harmless, right? It's a marketing strategy. But when you're trying to pivot, and if you have that information as a marketer, right, as somebody that works in marketing, then you can just counter market that and make it so that your company is more, it's more appealing to the customers that you both are looking for. And I'm going to appeal to Brian on this one, because obviously he's much more of a marketing guy than me. But I would think, if I was a marketer and I was looking at marketing strategies from our competitors, I think that's not really something that I should be able to find that easily.
No, absolutely not. And I think that, that's the thing where it's easy to say, well, it's national security, and we understand that. And you get down to the marketing strategy of a company and you think, what's the big deal? For that company, that could be lost business. For lost business, that could mean an employee that has to be let go because that work that you planned on them having isn't there. So for a business to protect, their intellectual property, you're essentially you're protecting the business. You're also protecting your employees. You're protecting your work, and so you do need to be very careful with that. So absolutely, and it's not just that. You have, similar to that regards, there was an incident that happened actually for Samsung where developers were using it to fine-tune code, and so they're putting it into a public version of, I think it might have been ChatGPT. I'm trying to remember off of my notes off the top of my head looking into it, but they put their code in. They were fine-tuning, debugging, and doing stuff and getting stuff from their code, working with the AI to fine-tune it. And somebody else at Samsung went in later, was looking and said, wait a second, that looks like that's ours. And it was on the public side where anybody could see their code. And from a security person, the idea of the code being out there, could it be exploited? What other things could, knowing the inner workings, that takes the security to another level as well, where now you're compromising potentially your infrastructure, your applications, your devices, and that can really hit your beyond marketing, which hurts your internal business function. You could be hurting your public credibility, your reputation, corporation. So no matter what you're putting in, and making sure that you have policies in place, and that you're thinking through how you're going to protect how you interact with AI.
Yeah, you're also really annoying your security people at that point because there are so many people out there trying to gain access to your code that shouldn't have it, and then to actually put it like, here, world, have it. We found this cool silver platter to set our code
Yeah.
on. Would anyone care to sample it? I'm sure there were stress balls exploding all through the company.
Yeah, it probably didn't. Yeah, it didn't go over well.
So let's talk about those potential risks. So what are the potential risks of installing DeepSeek AI on a company's network?
From installing DeepSeek in that regard, essentially, if you're connecting out, one, there's a couple of things. There are a variety of different avenues. One, if you're connecting out to their public models that you're using, if you're connecting via APIs, however you're connecting to it as a client, you've opened connection points into your environment. That can be exploited by third parties that aren't DeepSeek related, aren't part of that organization. And then understanding from a U.S. standpoint with the Chinese origins and with that country, China Mobile is partially owned by the Chinese government. So there is involvement, direct involvement there. And so you're basically opening a window to them to get in to your system. Similarly, with Chinese companies, they do have ties, maybe not directly, and it's not fully known. It's a privately held company that has released DeepSeek, not knowing the ownership, as you said, how close are the ties? So there is a potential for, beyond national security, if you're installing it on a government or state-owned system, there is an issue for corporate espionage, and the potential for that is large, right, especially with data being sent to China. You have the connections open to China, and sadly, corporate espionage is well known within China. It is an active, unfortunately, it's a worldwide thing where people are trying to gain that advantage, but has been an issue between the US and Chinese corporations, going back before AI, where you look at Cisco and Huawei with their network devices, where the initial Huawei devices duplicated Cisco's iOS. And there was a lot of back and forth, even to the developer comments, which is how Cisco figured out. So this is here where, code was exfiltrated in that case back in the past with Cisco. Now you have a case where you're basically opening the door into your company. If you don't have controls on your side to restrict that level of access in, is there lateral movement that could happen if they get in through the windows that you've opened for API calls, for that back and forth communication that needs to happen? Is there lateral movement that can happen to other corporate servers? What's on those corporate servers that can be reached? That's where the concern is. A lot of times from security is there's a window that's open. And security folks, we don't like any windows open.
Nope.
but in this case, you're opening the window directly to a country that has shown a willingness to commit to do corporate espionage, looking to gather information and take advantage.
That's well known. I mean, I don't think we're sharing anything new here, but I think I want to word this correctly, but I think this is, if I'm putting myself in their shoes, this is a good opportunity because the world is open to AI, and I'm using open to AI as a pun intended to open AI, since it is probably the most successful launch of an AI anything in the last few years. So shout out to them. But I think the world is open to that. And so it is as you were mentioning, it's sort of like a backdoor into getting all these other things that you were talking about into maybe some corporate espionage, maybe learning about not just the American people, because I feel like we're isolating ourselves. This is global. I mean, we're not the only ones that have access to this new AI tool. I mean, everybody around the globe has access to it. So it is a very, and I even think the name, I mean, it's a very deep reaching, to sort of like play along with their name with DeepSeek. I mean, it is a very deep seeking adventure, if you will. I'm just going to call it that.
Yeah.
Because it's very dangerous. And obviously there was a lot of reception, good reception, bad reception when it came out. But as you mentioned, it even had so much attention that the markets were going down for some of these companies because they all saw the low cost, the efficiency, the not necessarily needing all the bandwidth that OpenAI, Meta's, Google's, Gemini, all that stuff needs. So of course the markets are going to look at it and think, oh, wow, this is great. This is actually the answer.
Yeah.
But like you were mentioning, they're using old technology. They're using technology that's no longer, the one that we use to create our AI. So in the end, technology has a shelf life, right? That's why it keeps evolving. So I wonder down the road if this continues, if this is actually I'm always on the side of thinking that people do good. If this is a good thing, I think
you would not be a good security person with that mindset.
Hey, listen, where
you have to have the mindset that people are not.
No, so listen,
you want to hope, but
that's my psychological background. That's my psychological background. I'm
I
always
get it.
gonna.
You want to hope people are good,
yeah.
but
You know where I came from before. I didn't have that thought process where I used to work. So let's just clarify that. But I like to think that people do good, right? That their intentions are good.
Yeah.
I don't know so much about the Chinese, especially on this corporate espionage thing that we're on, and having seen some of the things that I saw back in the day, but I wonder, speaking about technology mainly, I wonder how long their technology is going to last, given that they have old technology that is no longer basically being used all around the world.
Yeah.
And then just how people are going to catch up to it. Ask information like the one you shared when it first came out to the organization here at Moser, and ask other security officers around the world are getting, caught up to it. How is that going to affect their usage rate? Because at the end of the day, that's what they want. They want people using this thing. It's really what they want. So as people wise up to it, move along, right? Is it going to move along, or is it going to be a mainstay?
I think it probably will to a degree, and that's the interesting thing. So, one of the first U.S. organizations that banned it was the U.S. Navy, and not having specifics, I don't know how often it was downloaded, but it's easy to get it off of the Navy's systems. There are tools that the Navy itself could use to go through, analyze the system, make sure it's not installed there. The other issue that comes up though is you have users, and now in a cell phone age, everybody on an aircraft carrier, say, has their own mobile device. They still have their mobile device. If they're connecting and you can download the app using the AI itself, you may be using and issuing queries that are not government related. You're not releasing top secret information. You may think, well, it's not a big deal. I'm not doing anything. But if the device is gathering your location information, all of this stuff, that becomes another way where a foreign government could track movement of troops, movement of ships. That's happened before, where monitoring other things. So that's a thing where it goes beyond just the installation on devices, but the education of people in their personal devices, even where you may not, well, I'm not handling that, understanding the other consequences. And I think that's a slower uptake. If they're getting information that they like quickly, it's not using as much battery life on the phone or whatever, people will sometimes, it seems more recently, have overlooked personal privacy concerns for convenience. And so I think that's a high hill that will have to be climbed. That's probably one of the nightmares for security people is people install apps on their computer because it makes life easier. People, it's not supported. People will do things that aren't supported, not thinking through the full ramifications because it makes their specific task easier. But it could persist. Right now it is older equipment, but China keeps upping the curve towards their aggression towards Taiwan. Is it a means of trying to get that technology? And what happens if they get that technology? There's always a potential for wider conflict and even backdoor means to get the technology that they want. Even the newer stuff with embargoes, there's always a way, if there's a desire, to get that stuff over there. Probably not on the volume that Google or OpenAI can just place an order for the NVIDIA chips and all of the GPUs that are needed to address this, but it's still possible that they can catch up in that regards over time. And again, it has sparked innovation, and that what they've done has been innovative and has reduced the requirements that a lot of others continue to just throw hardware at to solve the problem. It'll actually help these companies because now they have to streamline and think in that regard. So where will it take AI with them to the next step? It could lead to an explosion, or new discoveries and new processes. It'll be interesting to see.
Yeah, right. Yeah, there's a little bit of positive there in that regard, but I want to steer us away from DeepSeek for a second and talk about the risks associated with using AI as an organization.
Hey everybody, this is producer Brian. We've covered what DeepSeek is and potential threats that it could pose. Next week, we're going to move into talking about how to potentially mitigate risks associated with using AI, regulatory and compliance issues that companies should be aware of when they're using AI technologies. We're going to talk about ethical considerations for AI models accessing sensitive information potentially. We'll get into real-world examples where AI has compromised confidential information, checking in on how companies can balance the benefits and risks of integrating advanced AI technologies in their operations. So that's what we'll be getting into next week. And for now, I'm going to throw it back to Angel to wrap up part 1.
Thank you for listening in to this week's edition of Ask Anything, brought to you by Moser Consulting. We hope you enjoyed listening to Eric McCombs talk to us about DeepSeek AI and cybersecurity trends. Be sure to join us next time as we dive even deeper with our resident experts and explore what they're currently working on. Don't forget to share your ideas or topics with us through social media. In the meantime, please remember to give us a rating and subscribe to our feed wherever you get your podcasts. Until then, so long, everybody.
Go